There's a famous Monty Python sketch called The Funniest Joke in the World. The premise is this. An unsuspecting joke writer in the UK pens a joke so funny that exposure to it results in hysterical laughter, followed by swift and sudden death. It being the midst of World War II, the British government quickly weaponizes the joke, translating it into German, a separate translator for each word to avoid needless casualties. And British soldiers then chant the joke on the battlefield, decimating the German army. Now, there are a lot of absurdities that make this sketch funny. The most obvious is the idea of a joke so funny it's fatal. Comedians may say they killed at a gig, but they don't generally mean it literally. But the absurdity that I find most thought-provoking as an anthropologist who studies humor is the idea of the funniest joke in the world. Because we know that there can't be a world's funniest joke. We know that humor is subjective, that there can't be a funniest joke in the world because different people find different things funny. But at the same time, we have a really hard time letting go of the sense that some things are just funny and some things are just unfunny. A lot of the research on humor falls victim to this same fallacy. Most scholars of humor are aiming to unlock the secret of humor, to answer once and for all the question, what makes things funny? And most researchers look for the answers in the jokes themselves, trying to come up with a set of objective criteria that separate jokes from non-jokes. In other words, humor scholars sometimes treat humor like alchemy. Mix the right things together in the right way, and boom, you have a joke. Expose a person to the resulting joke, and blammo, you have laughter. The problem is, humor isn't a formula. A Reddit user found as much when he trained a recurring neural network on 5,000 jokes and came up with such computer-generated gems as, what do you say to a prince? No. And that's actually one of the more comprehensible ones. Another one goes, a man went to the window, and he asked him to go to the girl, it's so if-at, when you mean there is like it. Okay, so computers aren't going to be taking over open mic nights anytime soon. But in addition to reassuring comedians that they have job security, this example also points to a fundamental flaw in the alchemical approach to humor. Context matters. One of the things that anthropologists emphasize about language is that the meaning of an utterance can never be found solely in the words themselves, that meaning is deeply embedded in the context. And this is true of humor as well. Humor can't be located solely in the words that make up a joke. Humor lives in the telling, in the whos and whens and wheres and whys. What do you say to a prince? No is, I think we can all agree, not a funny joke, not a good joke at the very least. And yet, many of you laughed when I said it. Knowing that this series of words was generated by a computer programmed to come up with jokes, we can find humor in the utter failure. We can find subversion in the nonsense. The same series of words coming from, say, a person, a loved one recovering from a stroke, wouldn't be quite so funny. So the alchemical approach to humor, with its focus on the ingredients of a joke, tends to overlook the fundamental importance of context. It also runs into trouble when we consider the fact that different people find different things funny. If one person laughs at a joke and another person doesn't, is the joke funny? Is it even a joke? Do we say it's a joke in one instance and not a joke in the other? Or do we say that the person who didn't laugh is wrong, that they didn't get the joke? What if they understand why the joke is funny, but they don't themselves find it funny? I think it's safe to say that I get the joke why was 6 afraid of 7? Because 7, 8, 9. But I'm unlikely to laugh at it. We still call it a joke. And what about puns more generally, which are jokes but prompt groans instead of laughter? Okay, so maybe we can say that a joke is anything. Oh, good Lord. Well, you get a little foreshadowing here. Okay. Having some issues. Okay. So maybe we can say that a joke is anything that has the potential to make at least one person laugh. But then we face the problem of having to classify pretty much everything in the world as a joke. After all, you probably laugh many times over the course of a given day. A study done by 2 neurobiologists at the Free University of Berlin found that research subjects laughed a median of 5.8 times per 10 minutes of conversation. That's a lot of laughter. How much of it is prompted by actual jokes? Well, in 1993, the psychologist Robert Provine did a study where he found that only about 10 to 20% of conversational laughter is in response to something humorous, something that observers characterized as humorous. So if we can't locate laughter in the specific things that make us laugh, then how do we study it? That's where anthropology comes in. As an anthropologist who studies humor, I emphasize that humor is a social process. It's one that's messy and complex and culturally specific all the way to its core. That means contradicting a lot of the ways that we intuitively think about humor. For example, laughter is more volitional than we tend to think it is. We don't just choose not to laugh if we are, for example, offended by something. We also choose to laugh much of the time. For example, we're more likely to laugh when we're with other people. Consider the difference between going and seeing a stand-up comedy show in person as part of an audience and watching it at home by yourself. And even when you're watching it at home by yourself, it was still filmed in front of a live audience. So in a sense, you're still laughing with other people. Imagine if stand-up comedy routines were filmed with the comedian talking straight to the camera, with no audience present. Would they be as funny? Probably not. Or at the very least, you probably wouldn't laugh as much. That's because laughter isn't an individual phenomenon, it's social. The early 20th century philosopher Henri Bergson argued that in order for something to be funny, it needs to involve human beings, or things that we've imbued with human characteristics. The natural world can be beautiful, terrifying, sad, cruel, but never funny, according to Bergson. If that's true, then attempts at computer-generated humor are doomed to fail. What'll be funny aren't the jokes that the computers come up with, but rather the futile attempts by the programmers to actually get computers to write jokes. So laughter is social in multiple ways. We laugh with people, we laugh for people, and we laugh at people. Hand in hand with laughter's social nature is the fact that laughter is communicative. We use laughter in much the same way that we use language to convey information about ourselves and the situations we're in. Consider, and that's because humor is indirect. Humor requires leaving things unsaid. What comes between fear and sex? 5 is a joke. What comes between fear, the German word for 4, and 6, the German word for 6, 5, the German word for 5, is not a joke. Neither is what comes between 4 and 6, 5. If I tell this joke, I'm leaving out crucial information, and I'm relying on you to be able to provide that missing information. And how do I know if you were able to fill in the blanks, if you were able to supply that information that I left out? You're probably not going to explicitly confirm it. You're probably not going to say, oh, it sounded like you were saying English words, but they were actually German numbers. Instead, you'll probably laugh. So if humor is indirect, then laughter is an equally indirect way of expressing humor appreciation. We use laughter to communicate many different things. That we recognized the speaker was intending to be funny, that we were able to fill in the blanks of the missing information the speaker left out, that we didn't feel offended or threatened by the joke or the person telling it, that we are a cooperative conversational partner, that we're like the speaker in some ineffable way. Consider inside jokes. Despite the name, inside jokes are rarely actual jokes, but rather references to events or ideas that only a small group of people are privy to. If you're not familiar with the reference, there's no way you can possibly get the joke. If you are familiar with the reference, it shows that you're part of the same group as the person making the reference. So telling inside jokes is a really powerful way to increase group cohesion. Inside jokes demonstrate a group's groupness. They celebrate the group's shared experiences. And this is true of humor more generally. When we tell jokes, we're connecting with people. We are emphasizing our shared backgrounds, our shared experiences, our shared beliefs. But one of the things that anthropologists emphasize about social cohesion is that it requires division. In order to have an in-group, you need an out-group. In order to have boundaries, you need to police them. So at the same time that we use humor to form and reaffirm social bonds, we also use it to divide and exclude. Returning to inside jokes, imagine you're hanging out with a group of friends and one of them says something that seems to you to be a non sequitur. Everyone else laughs because they were privy to the particular event that your friend is referencing. Your non-laughter simultaneously demonstrates that you're not a part of the in-group and further alienates you from that group. So humor serves as a kind of social litmus test, separating those in the know from those out of the loop. And because we think of humor as something that cuts to the heart of the human experience, sharing a sense of humor with your intimates becomes an incredibly important thing. It's easy enough to be friends or partners with someone who has different hobbies or even different political views. It's much harder to be friends or partners with someone who doesn't find the same things funny. According to a 2013 Match.com survey, sense of humor was the third most important quality in a prospective mate for women, and fourth most for men. Now, what these people mean when they say sense of humor, of course, is a sense of humor similar to mine, which is seen as indicating being similar more generally. This means that anytime someone says something humorous or potentially humorous, they're effectively forcing their audience to declare their allegiance. Do you get the joke or do you not? Do you laugh or do you remain silent? In short, are you like me or are you unlike me? But as much as we revile those who disagree with us about what is and isn't funny, we also need them to exist. In my work on humor, I've argued that in order to find something funny, we need to at least be able to imagine that there are people who wouldn't find it funny. Getting the joke, after all, is only meaningful if it's possible for the joke to not be gotten. Laughter and unlaughter, as Michael Billig has dubbed it, are mutually constitutive. Each one defines the other. So maybe we can't literally weaponize humor the way that the British military does in the Monty Python sketch. But humor is a social weapon. It's a scalpel that we use to divide the world up into people like us and people not like us. That's why attempts to locate humor in the words or the things that make us laugh, attempts to devise universal rules for what makes something funny, are never going to be successful. Humor is a social process, not a particular set of words. And humor is, by its very nature, specific. There's no such thing as a joke everybody finds funny, because if everybody found it funny, then nobody would find it funny. Humor is paradoxical in this way. It simultaneously builds bonds and destroys them. It creates social order and strews disorder. It's both trivial and vitally important. Humor is creative chaos. That's what makes it difficult to study, but it's also what makes it endlessly fascinating. Thanks.